Welcome to Newsmax TV. I'm Kathleen Walter. With us today is Luis Fleischman, adjunct professor of sociology and political science at Florida Atlantic University Honors College. He is also the editor of the Americas Report, where he writes about the Bolivarian Revolution, its alliances with Iran, and the rise of anti-democratic forces in the region. An advisor to the Menges Hemispheric Society Project at the Center for Security Policy, he is the author of the brand new book, Latin America in the Post-Chavez Era. And Luis, welcome back. It's good to see you.
Good to be here, Kathleen. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. Well, it is often said that Latin America is experiencing a very positive time right now as the economies there and the democracies there flourish in the continent. However, in your book, you point out that under the leadership of the Bolivarian Revolution, democracy is actually deteriorating. How can the Bolivarian Revolution actually affect Latin America in general?
Definitely. There are certain areas in Latin America where democracy is flourishing, like for instance Brazil, Chile, Uruguay. But on the other hand, there are places such as Venezuela and the alliances that Venezuela has made with other countries such as Nicaragua, Bolivia, and Ecuador, and not to speak Cuba, where democracy there deteriorates under the leadership of the Bolivarian Revolution. And the Bolivarian Revolution is a new type of socialist revolution, I would say. It's a revolution that has many characteristics. But one of the main characteristics is that the state actually overruns civil society. The power of the executive overruns the democratic powers of the legislative power and the judiciary. This model is being imitated by a number of countries in Latin America, not only those who have made alliances with Hugo Chavez, but also with countries that actually are not part of the Hugo Chavez alliance, such as Argentina. The president of Argentina admires Hugo Chavez and admires his style of government, which, by the way, continues after his death.
What about the role of drug cartels like FARC and also Iran? What is the extent of their dangers?
There is no question. One of the characteristics of this revolution that takes to expand, as I said, Hugo Chavez set up a blueprint where he's trying to influence other countries. He's trying to influence the outcome of elections in other countries, and that's the way he got 4 countries now being on the side of Chavez, because he helped fund those candidates. Hugo Chavez pursues alliances with the drug cartels, with Iran and with the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia. The alliance with drug cartels is very dangerous, because the drug cartels, what they are doing is, besides intoxicating our society with drugs, they are also bribing and destroying the institutions of the state, the bureaucracy, the police, etc., etc. Today, countries in Latin America, for instance, are experiencing anarchy as a result of the presence of the drug cartels. Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, all these countries are experiencing a situation of anarchy. When you have a situation of anarchy, you have a lawless area, exactly like in Afghanistan. When you have a lawless area, you have proliferation of terrorists, you have proliferation of foreign powers, and today, most likely, countries such as Iran and the proliferation of terrorists is going to increase in those countries. Now, the dangers of the alliance with Iran is clear. The best friend of Iran after Syria is Venezuela and its allies. So what happens if Iran develops a nuclear weapon, God forbid? They can place nuclear missiles on Latin American soil. And that could be a very serious danger to U.S. security, because it enables Iran a second strike capability right in our neighborhood, right here in our backyard.
And in the book, you also talk about the role that China and also Russia, the role that these two countries play in the region. What can you tell us about that?
Well, of course, there is much more to in the book to more than the answers I gave you right now, of course, and I suggest everyone to read the book. But in the case of China, we have to understand, a lot of people perceive China as being a growing economic power, that all they look is to enrich themselves and to lift their population out of poverty. That is partially truth. They also have a political agenda. They resent the fact that the United States has influence in their backyard. You know, we have strong relations with South Korea, we have strong relations with the Philippines, we have strong relations with Japan, and therefore they resent that. And not to speak about Taiwan, when we are providing weapons to Taiwan, and they cannot take over Taiwan because we actually are there to veto that. So therefore, the Chinese are looking to increase their political power in our own backyard, here in the United States, our own backyard. Mm-hmm. So that means that they will tend to increase their alliances with this anti-American alliance led by Venezuela. And in that case, that means that the Chinese may help perpetuate these regimes whose actions are very dangerous to to democracy, to the security of the region, and to our own security.
And how do other countries in the region view this dangerous and anti-democratic continental movement?
Well, they have basically looked the other way. Brazil, for instance, has a flourishing democracy. They, of course, are facing many, many challenges. But on the other hand, Brazil has basically endorsed Hugo Chavez. Brazil has endorsed the Bolivarian Revolution also without adopting necessarily its blueprint. Why? Because Brazil, as it grows economically, they are also looking for political independence, an independent foreign policy. And they decided that their foreign policy is going to be different and, if necessary, contrary to US foreign policy. And therefore, they view Chavez and the Bolivarian Revolution as a symbol of, let's say, the victory of the left in the continent. And they, of course, see it as a counterbalance to the power of the United States. But they don't realize how dangerous they are for democracy in the region, something that the Brazilians have embraced. So therefore, what happened is that the OAS, the Organization of American States, that has a charter that protects democracy. In other words, they basically endorses the idea that if one country is violating democracy, they have every right to intervene in that country and demand that they restore democracy. Not intervene militarily, but demand that they restore democracy. They have not done it with the Bolivarian Revolution, with Venezuela, and with its allies. Mm-hmm. They have not done. They have ignored their violations of democracy. So there is lack of leadership on the part of Brazil, and I'm sorry, there is also lack of leadership on the part of the United States.
Yeah, that's my next question for you. Is the United States' influence in the region waning?
In my opinion, it shouldn't, because still the United States is the main trade partner of the majority of the countries, even though the Chinese are gaining ground. You know, Brazil used to be, the United States used to be the largest partner of Brazil in trade, and today is China. Yet, the United States has adopted a foreign policy where they basically, in my opinion, they are trying not to interfere in Latin American internal affairs, up to the point that they have not even properly demanded the restoration of democracy or the implementation of the OAS charter with regard to democracy. Mm-hmm. So we have had a rather passive and defensive attitude in Latin America, and we have not been able to make the demands that we needed. I don't think in the White House or in the State Department they view the problem of Iran or the problem of the alliance between the Bolivarian Revolution and the drug cartels or the FARC as a major problem. They don't see it as an imminent threat. And there is too much thinking of a threat in conventional terms and not in asymmetric terms, the way I am describing it in my book.
Mm-hmm. And Luis, while we have you, I want to get your quick take on a developing story that I know you've been following, and that's the situation abroad in Egypt. More than 600 dead, 3,500 injured in the wake of that military-led crackdown. How do you view this, and do you see Egypt going the way of Syria, possibly descending into civil war?
Well, hopefully not. Hopefully not, to answer your last question. But let me just make it very clear about what happened in Egypt. Every major player played terrible here, if I had to judge. First of all, starting with the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood, they were elected for the first time in 5,000 years in democratically elected elections. Once they were in power, they actually excluded everyone else except the Muslim Brotherhood. And so they proceeded to pass legislation that increased the power of the executive power and also increased the role of religion in government at the expense of certain rights. So they ruled by exclusion, and that created all these demonstrations in Egypt. But then you have the liberals and the secular liberals that they were resented the policies of the Muslim Brotherhood, and what they did, instead of trying to apply pressure to try to persuade the Muslim Brotherhood to be more inclusive, they made an alliance with the military, and the military carried out a coup d'etat. Two wrongs don't make a right. Mm-hmm. I believe that the military force should have been used as a matter of influence, telling the Muslim Brotherhood, you better rule in a more inclusive way or else. And then, what is worse, the military itself, once it took power, they proceeded to take power in their own hands instead of being a mediators toward a transition to a better situation. So, in other words, everyone here played terrible.
So what does the unrest in Egypt mean for the rest of the Middle East, particularly Israel?
Well, I believe that unrest in the Middle is not a good idea. I think the worst for Israel would be if Sinai becomes more of an anarchical place than it is now. That could make Israel vulnerable to terrorist attacks and to the presence of terrorists in Sinai. But on the other hand, I think if there is a civil war where Al-Qaeda actually becomes involved, where the Muslim Brotherhood basically asks Al-Qaeda to come to their help, I think this is terrible. This is going to be terrible. I believe that the military, as long as the military is strong in Egypt, it will prevail. But I think in Egypt there is a great opportunity to resolve the problems through democracy. And even though most of the actors there don't believe in democracy, they will have to accept democracy because that's the only way that brings everyone together. Mm-hmm. Not because they believe in democracy, but the democracy must be a way to bring everyone to the table. So I do not think that Egypt is going to fall into anarchy like Syria, but I believe that the Muslim Brotherhood is going to bring Al-Qaeda in, and that is going to be a serious problem. So I guess the military needs to change its ways, and I agree with Senator McCain on that one.
Last question for you, Luis. President Obama condemned the violence in Egypt, and he said that the joint military training exercises will cease. He has not said anything about the $1.3 billion in annual U.S. aid to the Egyptian military. What is your analysis of the president's response, and how do you view his Egypt policy?
Well, at this point, I think it's not clear what would be the policy toward Egypt. And I think the administration is reacting in a very impulsive way. It's reacting as events are taking place. Mm-hmm. I think the United States should have had a planned policy toward Egypt after the transition to democracy in the post-Mubarak era. And I think our foreign policy, and that's my analysis, is very subjective, our foreign policy at this time is, let's try not to be involved. We have enough problems here domestically. We don't need to be involved in every area, in every region in the world. And so what they did is that they dropped the ball on Egypt, and now they have a problem. So it's a good idea to cut the military aid to Egypt. In my opinion, it's not a great idea, because we may basically disconnect from Egypt. We may be less influential in Egypt. I think at this point the best we can do is try to restore democracy to Egypt, to make sure that Egypt actually goes on a democratic path, that the military actually goes slow. Remember, all these people who demonstrated against the Muslim Brotherhood now are upset because of the reaction of the military. Mm-hmm. So I think we need to be more involved, and not to say foreign policy is not our business. You know, we've been disengaged. So we need to be more engaged. We allowed the Muslim Brotherhood to do whatever they wanted, and all of a sudden things actually went out of hand.
All right, well, we'll see what happens. Luis Fleischman, thanks so much for being with us today. Congratulations on your book. It's a fascinating read. Again, it's called Latin America in the Post-Chavez Era. It's available on Amazon.com. Luis, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Kathleen. A pleasure to be here.
And thank you for watching Newsmax TV.